I wouldn't have it any other way.
1969. This was a year that defined modern America, more than most years. The Vietnam War was in full swing. Richard Nixon was inaugurated as the 37th President of the United States. In July, we set foot on the moon for the first time. In August, Woodstock, more than 350,000 music fans gathered in upstate New York. The Beatles released Abbey Road, their final album together. The Manson family committed a series of murders across California. The Cold War was growing from a simmer to a boil. The world was a crazy place, with amazing news and terrible threats coming from afar and right here at home. The faith and trust people had in their leaders was at a low point historically, only to trend downward after 1969. This was reflected in the media, and specifically for this video, in the death of the cinematic Western. Gone were the days of the white hat sheriff shooting it out with the black hat bandits in order to save the Ponderosa. Now the most popular movies had a new complexity of plot and character, and an anti-authority theme focused on protagonists who try to break the system.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off!
What you represent to them is freedom.
What the hell's wrong with freedom, man? That's what it's all about.
Easy Rider.
The Wild Bunch, directed by Sam Peckinpah, was a product of those times. Even today, it stands as one of my favorite movies of all time. The protagonists are criminals by every definition. Mercenaries to some, bandits to others, but these men would be the villains in most westerns from earlier in that era. There really are no traditional good guys in this movie. It's just one group of sympathetic outlaws trying to make one last big score before the world closes in on them. As a movie, it's slow, drawn out, and spends quite a bit of time developing the characters through flashbacks and dialogue. There's never an exposition dump to create a shortcut to the action. It's a gritty, violent movie, a real shock for the times, even in 1969, and especially for fans of westerns, which typically did not show the consequences of a gunshot wound or stabbing. The Wild Bunch was intended to be a realistic punch in the gut, which brings me to the director. Sam Peckinpah was known as a hard-drinking, drug-using, over-the-top director who was extremely tough to work with, but typically earned the respect for those who survived. In an interview, Peckinpah said of The Wild Bunch that one of his goals for this movie was to give the audience some idea of what it was like to be gunned down. And on one of the days of filming in the Mexican heat, he lost it. Apparently the gun battle he was filming didn't seem authentically violent enough, so he grabs a real gun with real bullets and shoots every round of it into a nearby wall, saying, "That's the effect I want." He also hated the stock sound effect for gunfire that Warner Brothers provided, so he and his crew and some probably stressed out editors went back in and made sure every different type and caliber of gun had a different and more accurate, more specific sound effect. When you watch any of Peckinpah's work, there's really two things that stand out. First, the lead characters will likely live by a code of honor that is quickly becoming obsolete to others as time moves on.
He's gonna get us all killed. I'm gonna get rid of him.
We're not getting rid of anybody. We're gonna stick together just like it used to be. When you side with a man, you stay with him, and if you can't do that, you're like some animal. You're finished. We're finished. All of us.
Looks like he's hit pretty bad.
Damn that deep sorting to hell. What would you do in his place? He gave his word.
Gave his word to a railroad.
It's his word!
That ain't what counts! It's who you give it to!
And second, those same characters will likely die, explicitly, emotionally, and graphically. The Wild Bunch originally got slapped with an X rating for violence, a rarity at the time, but was cut down to get the R rating. So let's set the stage. Our protagonists, the Wild Bunch, are Pike, played by William Holden, Dutch, played by Ernest Borgnine, the Gorch brothers, played by Warren Oates and Ben Johnson, and Angel, played by Jaime Sanchez. They are the Wild Bunch. The antagonist is really the world around them. Everyone is trying to kill them, even the environment. Peckinpah insisted they film the entire movie in the deserts of Mexico, even finding a town that did not have electricity, which looked in the 1960s like it was in the 1860s. The role of Antagonist is divided among two main groups: the scraggly group of thugs hired by the railroad company, and a Mexican warlord named Mapache. Both groups are deadly, but for very different reasons. The railroad thugs that are sent to kill the Wild Bunch are led by Thornton, played by Robert Ryan, who was once a member of Pike's crew, which puts his skill level on par with those he's hunting. The only reason he has even agreed to hunt down his old friend Pike is under the threat of being sent back to jail and subsequent torture. Some time ago, before the events of the movie, and after a hard night of drinking and womanizing, Thornton and Pike were ambushed. Pike escaped, Thornton didn't. Now Thornton is in a difficult position of hunting a group of his own kind that he fully respects, and says multiple times in the movie that he wishes he was with them. General Mapache, played by Emilio Fernandez, however, gets his power from his military power. He has a large group of soldiers fighting against real-life Mexican leader Santa Anna. Mapache is drunk and surrounded by women most of the movie, but his army is large enough and led by enough clear minds to be formidable, to a point of being a regional power that most are afraid to get on the wrong side of. Interestingly, as a side note, Emilio Fernandez, the actor who played Mapache, actually fought in Mexico's civil wars under Adolfo de la Huerta. De la Huerta was eventually defeated and Fernandez was captured. He was tried for treason and sentenced to 20 years in prison. He escaped and fled to Los Angeles, where he found his way into the film industry and began a lifelong friendship with director John Ford. After he returned to Mexico, he became an actor and a director, and became known as one of the greatest filmmakers in the history of Mexican cinema. The Wild Bunch, caught in the middle of these two growing powers, feel the walls closing in and have to rely on their wit, their capacity for violence, and ultimately their integrity to survive. When those aren't enough to withstand the tightening grip on their lives, they choose to face the end with the only thing they keep: their honor. Despite my adoration for the film, The Wild Bunch opened to negative and hostile reviews. Some of the comments after Warner Brothers screened the film made me laugh. "Do not release this film, this whole thing is sick," and "the worst potpourri of vulgarity, violence, sex, and bloodshed I've seen put together." Even the legend John Wayne complained the film destroyed the myth of the Old West. I get it, remember the world was upside down. The cinematic western was one of the last places to see a traditional and clean hero fight for normative values, something you could take your whole family to. Wholesome. The Wild Bunch, even today, is amazingly violent and dirty, but that's not why I love it. The Wild Bunch works for me on many levels. Number one, it's a story about that moral code a person has, even when the world around him doesn't. What does a person do when standing by your convictions is clearly going to put you in an impossible position? Several times in this movie, Pike is put in a tortuous position, deciding whether to essentially cut and run or go in and fight, when one way is right but deadly, but the other way is wrong, safer, and probably more profitable. What do you do in the no-win scenario? The second thing is, how does a person survive and thrive when power, political, economic, or military, is quickly being eaten up by a few strong groups while normal people are caught in the middle? This is a path that leads to conflict with those same everyday people suffering the consequences. And number three, how do you pull off one last big score? You're too old to survive not only from the harsh environment, constant violence, but really the changing times. Do you have what it takes to make enough money to ride off into the sunset and get your happily ever after? In a departure from typical westerns, we are shown that people living this life rarely get a happy ending. Only death, or worse. After filming the scene where Ernest Borgnine and William Holden sit by the campfire and their characters vow they wouldn't have it any other way, it was hard for director Sam Peckinpah to yell cut because he, mean old Peckinpah, was crying.
That kind of information is kind of hard to come by.
I don't say it's going to be easy, but it can be done.
He'll be waiting for us.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
When I watch this film, I get a better understanding of what it means to be the man that many have aspired to be their entire lives. The tough decisions, the integrity, the constant clawing at the world to make something out for yourselves and provide for your family. When people refer to that famous last walk, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about, it has to be framed with context. If you were to show someone who has not seen the Wild Bunch that scene, they may appreciate the cinematography. The use of depth of field and anamorphic shots is truly amazing. But they don't get all the story behind it and why it means so much. What led to this moment, and what choices were made, and what consequences they're facing. As my reviews imply, I'm a fan of older movies. Modern movies lack a lot of the qualities that speak to people like me on an emotional or intellectual level. My hope is that this review not only pays homage to one of the greatest movies of all time, but inspires you to go see it, or see it again if you haven't seen it in a while. I wanted to end this video with a little story. After 80 days of hard shooting during the wrap party with all the crew in Mexico City, Sam Peckinpah wandered off to an isolated corner of the soundstage and broke down for some time. All the blood, sweat, and tears, all the fights with his crew, the heat, the dust, the violence was over. No one knew at that point what the final product would be like. Was it worth it? Roy Sickner, who wrote the story for The Wild Bunch, partied so hard in Mexico and gained such a reputation that he was escorted back to the US by the Mexican government and banned from ever returning. There were many other stories about the shooting of this film that I cut for the sake of time. It's amazing the film even made it to cinemas. Waylon Green, who wrote the screenplay, said he wrote the film thinking I would like to see a Western that was as mean and ugly and brutal as the times, and the only nobility in men was their dedication to each other. I can think of no fitting summary for this film. Thank you for watching.